The formula was based on a trade deficit with each country rather than directly matching the tariffs. So here's how it works. They took the trade deficit the US has with a country and divided it by the country's exports to the US, and then have the result for niceness. For example, the US trade deficit with China in 2024 was $294.4 billion, and imports from China were $439.9 billion. So step 1, trade deficit equals $295.4 billion. Step 2, $295.4 billion divided by $439.9 billion equals 67%. Step 3, 67% divided by 2 equals 33.5, so round up, which is how we got to 34%. A 34% tariff was applied to Chinese goods. Now, this formula was actually used for a lot of the countries listed, so let's look at another one. The US has a $17.9 billion trade deficit with Indonesia. Its exports to the US are $28 billion. So 17.9 divided by 28 equals 64%, which we are told is what Indonesia charges us. And because we're nice, we'll charge them half, 32%, half of 64. In reality, the number Indonesia charges the US is not 64% and never was. What it actually is about 8.1% on average. But it's certainly not 32%, and it's nowhere near 64%. Here's the rest of the countries if you want to pause and do the math yourself. But wait, it gets even worse. Because these numbers were purely based on goods, and the math completely ignored what are called the services section of an economy, which are things like tourism, education, financial services, and that's where the US actually has a trade surplus. In other words, we export more of that stuff than we import, and that should have been considered in the tariff calculation, but they were not. So what this means is that the US will now charge the world anywhere from 10 to 50% more for its products, and some countries even more on top of that for certain industries. So ultimately then, what does this all mean, and what's going to happen next? So most people will fall in one of two camps. The louder camp being, Trump is so dumb he doesn't understand economics. Oh. So that's one of them. But the second camp says, maybe there's more to this than meets the eye.